the way this exam was marked was in 3 sections. So we marked the short answer section, then one of us marked the significant person, and the other person marked the other 2 sections. So we'll each talk to our own section. Can I start off by saying that no one in this term 3 is going to overrule anyone's touch. So there's no point coming to either miss in the section like this and vice versa. You need to have a conversation about your marks and your results these days. One thing I can promise you is we are incredibly consistent, and I'll show you that in data. The big question I suppose we need to start with then is why do we do feedback, or why invest an hour to talk about something again 3 or 4 weeks ago now? The first one is to check the marks of the right, both in terms of position as well as interpretation of what you see. That is not an opportunity to get to see. So on the exam itself, you don't get that chance to come back to part of the whole process. So you need to know that we are having that discussion today, but it won't apply in a couple of minutes' time. We're doing it so that you get the understanding. The idea of all these assessment tasks is really setting you up to take this. So if you're not interpreting the question correctly, you're not responding to it fully, you need to understand where you're going right to get the marks. I'd suggest that in the section 9, that's not an issue. Answer the question itself about that. Also, I'm going to provide resources and resources, and we'll share those with you throughout. So the big data that you're interested in, here's the headline numbers. So 22 to mark out of 35, 22 is your average, maximum is there, same as 1 and 2. You'll see only a slight difference between 1 and 2 unit, although interestingly, there was guys in 1 unit who scored higher marks than the highest mark in 2 unit. It's exactly the same paper, exactly the same question, and they all get mixed together to mark. The same happens with HS. So those guys studying 2 unit will do exactly the same question with 1 unit, and their response will be mixed up with 1 unit guys. It is not uncommon for 1 unit students to score a higher mark in exactly the same question as 2 unit. The number of units you study in the electrification of difficulties is how many hours of total you study. When we start looking at the individual components of it, section 1 was pretty good. An average of 11 out of 15 is not bad. When you start looking at the other sections, we're talking the mark out of 20. So the extended response writing is weaker than your short answer generally, and that certainly applies in 1 unit. It's better in 2 unit with the extended response, but not good enough yet. The reason I put the counts at the bottom there, by the way, is purely to give you an idea of how many students answered that particular question. So if we look at 1 unit, for instance, the majority of people answered the significant person. Only 1 person did practice, and 7 people did ethics. So that was the way it broke down. The reason you need to know that number is because, well, an average of 9 is significant if there's 30 people in there, but it's not significant if only 1 person did that particular response. So it gives you an idea of how accurate that data is. Turning them into percentages, just because I certainly think better that way, and you may as well, gives you an idea of where we're sitting. 75% is the average that the Board of Studies looks for every exam. So 75% should be our average, and we're not there yet. Interestingly enough, I asked exactly the same questions of the 2013 cohort, and I intentionally left them the same this year to give us an idea of how we're tracking against last year's group. So this year's group, and this is just looking at 1 unit data by the way, this year's group is about 2% better. Interestingly, but that minimum marks a problem. So the bottom end of this cohort is significantly lower than the bottom end of last year's cohort. And again, I'll talk to that a bit later too. But it gives you an idea of how we're tracking. Overall, it's not bad. Last year's cohort was one of the best ones we've seen. I fully expect that this cohort will do better. But every indication to say that, but we need to live particularly for those guys who are sitting below the average.
Okay, the first question. I marked all of section 1, that's the 3 parts. Outline a contribution of one significant person or school of thought on Christianity. Obviously, you can immediately rule out the school of thought. We didn't study a school of thought. We are clearly talking here about Paul of Tarsus. Let's call him Paul of Tarsus and not Saint Paul. We know what he went on and did, and we know what we later acclaimed him as, but we refer to him as the syllabus does, and that is Paul of Tarsus. Okay, these are my marked notes, so let me speak to these. Let me assure you that there was very succinct and well-written responses covering, and is a little allusion to the sort of content that I would expect it to see in a 3-mark question on contribution. You really need to hammer it out pretty quickly. 3 marks, that's it, 3 lines, 3 to 5 lines, I guess, and that is done. So you need to refer to his missionary journeys, to the establishment of churches, and by spreading the message of Christ and his prolific contribution, that is his great contribution to the New Testament. That is his contribution. Some responses went too far along the line of giving us a bio on telling you about his parents, about the 10 languages, about where he's born, about the languages he spoke. That's all very lovely and very interesting, but it doesn't necessarily get you 3 marks when the question is asking about his contribution to Christianity. Okay? And if you know you're guilty of that, just knock it out of the 3 marker. It may be relevant and it may be valid in a 20-mark essay on him, but certainly for 3 marks on contribution, it's purely that. How did he contribute to Christianity? As I've said, there are some awkward and repetitive expressions, which just brings down the quality of the overall response, even in a 3 marker. Okay? So if you're repeating yourself, it's a bit awkward, a bit clumsy, it does suggest a lack of revision or a lack of planning or a lack of clear thought in the exam room, and that will buck you down, unfortunately. That was really well. As I've said, we call it forward process, just a pedantic but turned meeting. That was 3 marks. Part B, a 6-marker, asking you to explain. Explain. What do we want? We want cause and effect language, linking language, linking ethical teachings of Christianity on one of the following areas. Straight away, number 2 and 3, because and stand out like this one, very important something to make that reason for protected. Don't go there. You probably won't get more than 1 out of 6, even if you've got extensive general knowledge. Thankfully, we all seem to be aligned on that, and we just covered by this. Now, up against, that's of course this I have written this down. You don't need to write this down, it has this representation I think it's important in a 6-marker to start with a very brief definition of bioethics. Okay? Because there were some very awkward, clumsy attempts to begin this response. And if you set up on a clumsy foot, it's a bad start. Even if you pick it up towards the end, you probably won't nail that 6 out of 6. And in this section 1, you want to nail it. Because you want to walk away with 15 out of 15 to give yourself room to still get that band 6 in the other 2 sections. Alright, some strange explanations of bioethics at the beginning, some making incorrect claims that bioethics is the study of Christian ethics. And this needs, obviously, urgent attention and urgent revision. As I said, otherwise the response begins rather awkwardly and rather strangely and gets you off to a bad start. So I would go away, revise bioethics, get yourself one nice, neat little definition of it, and begin your response there. The question asks for an explanation of the teachings, right? Even us as markers, we sit down and we have to ponder what sort of content would we like to see in the response and what would we put in the response to get a band 6, all right? That's something we're all charged with doing at the moment, trying to get the band 6 ourselves. Now, as a student, if I was to look at that, and certainly as a teacher, I think the question's asking for an explanation of the teachings, but how can you explain the teachings if you actually don't acknowledge what they are? So you need to have a little bit of background information, and it's not explicit in the question, but as SOR students, we actually have to sometimes give a little bit more because it's implied in the question, it's not explicitly asked, But it's kind of strange to attempt a question that asks you to explain the teachings, as in the message of the teachings, without actually acknowledging what they are. So yes, the explanation of the teachings, content such as sanctity of life, God's creation, etc., etc. But you need to be able to very briefly slot in there what are the sources of those teachings. Note carefully, and I've got it here in parentheses. It is important to note that this can actually also be a separate question. So you might actually get a 6-marker just on what are the sources of ethical teachings. You see the slight difference. What are the sources and explain the teachings. But the content, there is a little bit of double up there. And I'm suggesting to you that even if it doesn't ask for it, you probably should be name dropping the source of the text that just said, even just briefly. For example, if you are referring to the variant Roman Catholicism, then you might mention the source of teachings being the Catechism of the Catholic Church, Holy Scriptures, and of course anything written by the Pope, any Pope. They are called encyclicals, letters to the people. Okay, so papal encyclicals, the Catechism, the Holy Scriptures, you might name drop those somewhere along the way. Okay, if you are talking about the variant Protestantism, Scriptures, anything that comes from the General Synod, the Council of Bishops, and Orthodoxy, the Apostolic Tradition, which is very handy for us. Because if you want to get bonus marks, you obviously want to talk about the variants. And Orthodoxy is a good one to know because they highly revere the Holy Scriptures, in particular the Apostolic Tradition. And who's our man, who's the apostle that we're speaking about, is Paul. So anything written by Paul, using marriage, using bioethics, you can use for source of teaching for Orthodox Christianity. Okay? And anything that they also revere the authority of the Holy Fathers, that is a source of ethical teachings there as well. You don't need to mention all of them, and certainly there could be a question just on the sources. But even if they're asking you to explain what the teachings are, I think you need to name drop a couple of the actual sources. Alright, some responses link the teachings with the sources very well and made references to variants very well, but to be honest, very few mark in this section. Usually I bumped mark because variants weren't addressed. Now when we're studying religion, when we're talking about Christianity, we can't speak authoritatively about Christianity by giving one example and saying that's it for Christianity. We can give an example for Catholicism, Roman Catholicism. We can give an example for Orthodox Christianity. We can give an example for Protestantism. And that's offering the examiner a little bit more breadth of understanding. You're showing off, if you like, your knowledge of Christianity and that it goes beyond one variant. Because we can't speak on bioethics and we can't speak on rituals of marriage as though it's one singular practice. There might be common threads, there might be common themes, and certainly the sacred texts underlying them are very similar, if not the same in some instances. But the actual outward expression of marriage and beliefs in bioethics differ across the variants. So really, if you're getting 5 out of 6, have a look at your response. Maybe it's a case of going and slotting in somewhere just a little reference to a variant, just so that you don't sound a little bit naive in your response by saying that all Christians are the same when it comes to this. Show them that you've researched, show them that you understand that it differs, or points of comparison if they're the same. If anything else, say that both Orthodox and Catholic Christians regard marriage as a sacrament. We're not on marriage yet, but that sort of thing, a point of comparison or a point of difference. But you'll find if you've got 5 in this section, you are probably without reference to variants. Another thing, are you guilty of this? Making very random references to sacred texts and just depositing quotes because it looks good, sounds good, it seems to fit, without any real explanation of the place of that sacred text. Just like you would do with a history essay, just like you would do with an English essay. You must give it context, you must give it place. You don't just suddenly stop what you're writing and in brackets chuck in a quote from Genesis because, oh, we've got to refer to a sacred text. Make it fit, make it count. quote about marriage, and I was left to my imagination as to where this sacred text where this quote might come from. So don't just deposit them randomly. Be academic, be exam smart, know that the expectation on you is to reference appropriately and to explain it away. Don't just slot it in there. Name dropping. Alright. Final part of section 1, section C. Analyse the significance of one of the following practices for individuals within Christianity. My class likes to joke around a lot and pretend that they're going to answer one of the others, but they know that life won't be very happy for them if they ever did that. So you know that you are looking at marriage, not death and mourning and not church services. Again, don't be tempted to go down that path just because you think all of a sudden you've read something, you've seen something, and you've got ample general knowledge to support you doing a question on church services. You won't get more than 1 or 2 out of 6 because it stands out like a sore thumb. So we're all united on that. We are talking about marriage. Alright, some very, very good responses here. Can I echo, please, what Mr. Matheson said? You know your stuff. You know your stuff. You have linked key terms from the course well, and you've actually incorporated sacred texts very well here. Something about marriage. I don't know what it is, but this is done reasonably well. The content is not the problem, however. As was said earlier, it is exam smart. Do you have exam smarts? If you do, you'll probably walk away with 14 minimum out of 15 here. If you've got a few things you need to tweak, but your content's good, you're probably sitting in the 10 to 12 range. And there's room to grow and there's room to move, and you'll get there. Content-wise, the question asks about the significance of this practice, i.e. marriage, for the individual. We need to be careful here. A few years ago, Sir might recall, there's a bit of a debate around prepared responses in this particular subject. There is nothing wrong with preparing a response and knowing your content and going in armed and prepared. But you go in and you write down a prepared response and you don't manipulate it to fit the actual set question on the day, the examiner will look at it and say, well, this is just a prepared response. They have made no attempt to interpret their content, their knowledge, their understanding, and manipulate it and massage it and re-image it, if you like, so that it fits the actual question on the day. My point being, this question asks about significance for the individual. There is another question they could ask, significance for the community. There is another question they could ask, outline the practice. There is a few sort of formulaic type ways to ask this content, to draw this content from you. Ensure your response doesn't read like a prepared response to the question of significance for the community. I understand and you understand that both content is actually very similar. When I sat down and I wrote answers to the question myself, significance for the individual, significance for the community, there is definitely overlap, but they're definitely different responses. Okay, and I'm happy to make this available as well. I won't go into all the content here, but be assured the answer should read differently. Significance for the individual is very different, though it does overlap with significance for the community. It's an easy question. If you know your stuff, this is a really straightforward 6 marks. Where did you fall down? Again, the expectation for full marks is that you must refer to variance, because as I said, as you know, we can't just say Christian marriage is like this. All Christians do this on the day of their wedding. For all individuals, it's important to do this, and for all Christian communities, it's important that it does this. Some of you even said that for all Christians, it's a sacrament. It isn't. Okay, so get your facts straight, refer to variance, and if nothing else, give us a point of comparison. If you want to say they're the same, at least you've mentioned a variant. Shared practice between Protestants and Catholics. Shared practice between Orthodox Christians and Catholics. Done. You've mentioned variants. Your job is done. As I said again, do not quote the scriptures without context. They need to be appropriately referenced. And also a little bit of awkward expression creeping in. If I underline something sort of with a little wobbly line or a question marks there, I actually don't know what you're trying to say, or it's awkward expression. It's clumsy, it's repetitive, and you don't get marks for that. Alright, so I guess my Parting words. You know your stuff, but get exam smart. Know where you need to tweak that 4 to a 6. Know how to tweak that 5 to a 6. If it's a matter of addressing a variant, do it. Go out and find yourself some content. If it's a matter of more intelligently referring to text and sacred text, we'll do it. Fix it up. Go from 11 to 12. Go from 13 to 15. Any questions? No? If you need any further information about my marks, obviously you've got the CV section 1. So we're looking at two components here. We're looking at the development of Christianity and the expression of Christianity. Now this question was the one that most of you chose to answer, which is great because there's a lot of comparative responses there. The things that some of my notes here that I will elaborate on. There's too much emphasis on earlier, there were prepared responses, and a lot of those prepared responses were basically regurgitated onto the sheet, which is fine. You can prepare the response, but again, you need to relate your answer to the question. Do write about marriage, do write about ethics, but the focus is on Paul. So what did Paul, what were his writings, what were his teachings in relation to those? Paul didn't write on bioethics. A lot of boys mentioned that Paul was writing on bioethics. He didn't. A lot of his teachings, a lot of his writings are used to create an opinion or an idea about different issues that are relevant to us today. So you need to understand the clear differences between those. When looking at the development, you're looking at how did Christianity spread, how did it grow, how did it become today. So what did Paul do? These are his writings, his missions, his journeys, okay? His theologies, and his teachings in particular. So the language that was used was used quite well, but again, the authored writing was coming out as well. Using words for the sake of it is really obvious to the when reading it. When looking at key words, so the jargon that is being used, at least spell them right. Like this one, spell it right. Okay, again, you're looking at the marker reading speed, so knowing that what students did really well is that everything was succinct and it flowed really well. So you looked at the development, how Christianity grew, and it was done in a way that it started at the beginning and then what it led to its development and how it's expressed. Again, that prepared response, a lot of boys were focusing on marriage and speaking about all the different teachings in marriage, but how to relate that. So clear your answers, find out because if that question was changed to a marriage or a practice question, you just still get the same
Thanks, guys. Grab a seat. I want to get through parts B and C. Obviously, this exam gave you a lot of choice, which you won't get in HSC. HSC probably you won't get the option of which topic of the three would you like to do. You'll just simply get one. And so you need to be in a position walking in the door in September that you can answer any one of the three topics equally well. Obviously, all three content areas link, and I'd expect to see you need to have responses, although you need to be able to tailor each response and focus in on that question, which I guess is what you're looking at there in the last one. So let's take a look at part B. Outline one significant practice and demonstrate how it expresses the principal beliefs of Christianity. So we're doing marriage. The question here hinges on linking practice and belief. How do you tie together the practice of marriage with the beliefs of Christianity, knowing that Christianity has many different beliefs from the different variants? That's the trick with this question, if you want. That's what you've got to interpret. How do you tie together practice and beliefs? Now, obviously, a lot of the beliefs will come from St. Paul. A lot of the content in Paul will link back, and that allows you to tie not only Paul, but also marriage. So if we're talking about Paul's teachings around love, you tie that into the practice of marriage, and all of a sudden you can dip into all three content areas to develop a really solid response. But you need to relentlessly answer that question around marriage. So the support should come from the following quotes, and the structure in this one's really key. If you've got each paragraph starting off, coming back to the question, if you start each question by identifying a principal belief and then showing how it links to the practice of marriage, you'll have this one linked. If your opening paragraph or opening line in each paragraph is a bit washy and you're not quite clear on what you're doing, you're really going to struggle. So this is one of those questions where structure is critical, and that will only come if you've written a proper plan before you start writing. Skipping on to part 3 then. Discuss how Christian teachings are applied to one of the following areas, bioethics. So discuss how the teachings are applied. This is not asking where they come from. This is not asking who believes them. It's how and in what way is this teaching applied in real world around bioethics. So the teachings are the key driver in this particular question, and they always are in bioethics. The examples of abortion, euthanasia, or whatever else you like, they're very nice examples, but they're just that. They're not the point. Don't get point and example confused, and it's the real temptation when you come to bioethics. You've got to deal with, if you like, a bit of a hierarchy. So the teaching area is bioethics. So you've already narrowed it down by picking that topic area. You then need to go into a particular teaching in bioethics. You then link it to a particular example and demonstrate how that changes or stays the same among variants. So if every paragraph deals with the teaching, explains how it applies, provides an example, such as abortion, and then suggests, well, in the Uniting Church, each individual is able to come up with their own informed position on it, which is quite different to the Greek Orthodox position, or the Roman Catholic position, or the whatever other position. So Uniting Church is a really good example to go with, particularly in bioethics, because they enable the individual adherent and individual communities to come up with their own position. But they must be informed positions. They can't just go, yeah, I believe this, no, I don't believe this. They've got to come up with justification. So the individual adherent has to do the research, has to do the interpretation of the teachings to be able to then come up with their personal position. If you like, create it something like a target. So the teaching's right in the centre. The examples are quite peripheral. The examples are not the key to it, and they won't be the ones that score you the great marks. To tie it down specifically, if the teaching was reference for life, you can apply it in bioethics, but you can also apply it in other ethical areas as well. And the example of abortion. So you've got to spend the bulk of the time focusing on the teachings. I'll be quiet for a few moments to give you a chance individually just to read through this paragraph and see how it applies. highlight is the first paragraph. What's important about it, but, is the very first line. You know what paragraph it's talking about. You also know from the last one what the next paragraph is. And you can see how the focus in both cases is on the teaching. So if you come up with 3 or 4 techniques that apply, 3 or 4 of those paragraphs plus an introduction including you've got 3 pages before and 3 pages. That's the level of structure that we're going to do. So I want to talk gentlemen. Pick up your extended response page. Don't care which of the 3 you chose. Open up to the inside cover. So not your feedback sheet, but your actual first page of writing. And I want you to ask the following questions and see how they apply to your response. The first of them, and here's the one that I've heard all 3 to speak about. And I like the way of phrasing this. You need to relentlessly answer the question. Relentlessly, without stop, without break, answer the question. Every paragraph should be able to be taken out in isolation, and it should answer the question on a single point. And if you can't pick a random paragraph in your writing and clearly see how that answers the question, then it's not yet good enough. These are the 4 topics that I really wanted to delve into then whilst you're looking at your extended responses. The actual formatting of the writing of quotes, how you use the quotes, the overall structure that you've got in your response, as well as individual paragraph structure. So in terms of writing the quote itself, there are 3 ways you can possibly write it. If you put quotation marks in, it's saying these are the exact words. If you haven't got the exact words, don't put quotation marks. Similarly, a quote should include the actual reference. I heard that mentioned earlier too. So if it's coming from Luke chapter 2, verse 14, then put it. If you don't know the exact position, but you know that it comes from Luke, put down Luke. Put down as best you can, but don't make numbers up. Don't randomly guess and hope that you can come up with the right biblical reference. Paraphrasing is a little bit different. Paraphrasing is basically saying, here's what the guy's talking about, here's what the writer's intending, these are the types of things that he's saying, but I can't use the exact words. And that's okay too. If you are paraphrasing, you don't put the quotation marks, but you can still put the reference. That's an acceptable way of referencing as well. Ideal would be full reference, quotation marks, and the full annotation of where it came from. But in reality, you're in an exam room without access to notes. Do the best you can. Take the most accurate option of those 3 that you possibly can. But don't just make up stuff. This was also mentioned earlier. Don't just randomly dump a quote in the middle of a paragraph and hope that it works. Let me give you some examples. Now for me, this is the way that somebody will like it reads. It's like reading a paragraph, it's suddenly someone saying, it's as random as some of these things. And when you read the paragraph, it stands out as randomly as these do. My personal favourite. The randomness of these is exactly the same as your quotes landing in the paragraph if you haven't done anything with it. You may as well stick one of those pictures in the middle of your page because it achieves nothing for you. Quotes are there to support what you're trying to say. If they're not supporting what you're saying, don't use them. They don't make the point by themselves. You can't expect the examiner to join dots on your behalf. You need to actually join those dots for the reader. let me take it into a different context again. If the question was the colour of the sky, you could well write everyone agrees the sky is blue. You would be wrong. A better response would be something like this. You can see how the quote's been used to support the answer. It's not just a random dump. It's not just a piece of information on the page. It's being used and linked in and referenced. So that's the level you need to attack. That's the level you need to aim for every single paragraph in an extended response. So it's a lot of quotes. If you're looking at 4, 5, maybe 6 paragraphs, knowing that a paragraph is more than 4 lines, you'll need a good bank of quotes. Having said that, you can use them again and again. Let's talk about overall structure. You know this stuff from about year 3 or 4 when you started writing. Introduction, body, conclusion is nothing new. Here's what I want you to do. On your piece of paper, in your extended response, put your finger on the place where you wrote the plan. Actually, put the finger on the page right now. If you can't do that, put that same finger in the air. If you can't, put the finger on the page, put it in the air. If you can, put it right where you put the plan. Should. Hands down. This is why a plan is important. Stay with me. 7 minutes to go, stay with me. If structure is important, if sequencing points is important, and I heard that with the Paul essay, that you need to talk about the development and then the expression. If you don't know what you're going to talk about, you can't get that sequence of points. Your introduction really should say to the marker, here's the answer to your question, and here's the points that I'm going to deal with as time goes on. You don't need to name them as bluntly as you would in year 7 or 8, but you need to give the marker a bit of a roadmap where your response is going. So you might simply say, I'm going to explore the development of early Christianity, followed by the modern expression. That might be the roadmap you provide for the marker in the Paul question. But you need to provide it. And you can't do it unless you've written a plan. It's a real investment of time. When you look at your body, just read the first line of each paragraph. Do that now. Read just the first line of each paragraph. Alright, eyes back up. Having read just those couple of lines, is it clear to the reader what the point is you're talking about in this paragraph? Rhetorical questions for the moment. When you read the first line of each paragraph, it should be very clear what that entire paragraph is talking about. That paragraph should contain only the one point. Every paragraph should contain a reference, a quote of some sort. It needs structured examples to back up the point that you're making. And does each paragraph answer the question? That's something you're going to have to go home and have a read through and identify in each paragraph, where am I actually answering the question? Finally, then, when we get to the conclusion, a lot of people struggle with conclusions purely because they run out of time, and that's poor time management. You need a conclusion because it says to the marker, I've answered the question. After the marker's read 2 or 3 pages of your work, you need to tie it together and prove to them you've actually answered the question, because it's a temptation to drift around a little bit during the paragraphs. So your conclusion will tie it all together for you, and it will make sure that the marker knows that you've understood the question and you've answered it clearly. Paragraph structure is something, again, we've dealt with quite a few times. Lots of people know the phrase feel, but for some reason they start off with the example, and this particularly applies in bioethics. If abortion appears in the first line, if euthanasia appears in the first line, you're doing it in the wrong order. So if you wrote a bioethics response, you need to make sure that you've not got the example in that very first line. Can I suggest to you also that very first line really makes a difference? Here's an example of how. If that was our response, and we're writing or that was a question, we're trying to write a response, can I suggest to you that the first line of each paragraph really makes a difference to the interpretation? The first line that's written in each paragraph says to the marker where this is going. So the point might well be clowns in a boat, but unless you phrase it the right way, it can be interpreted in many different ways. My point is this. Your first line in every paragraph needs to be strong. Finally then, and we've already mentioned it, no one in this team is going to overrule anyone else's marks. So your marks need to be queried with the person who marked that section. The person who spoke to it is the person who marked it. If you believe you deserve more marks, but you're actually sitting in the right bracket, bad luck. If you think that you're in the right range of marks, you got a 13 and you think you deserve a 14, pop it, trust us, that's our professional judgment. If you believe you're well out, if you think you've been put into a band down here and you should be in a band up here, then go and speak to the individual who marked it and say, "Sir, miss, can you help me out? I need to understand why I'm not in this bracket." Next period then. Here's the expectation. This slide package, along with the audio and video content we've just recorded, will land on Hive today. I want you to review it with your paper in front of you just for the sections that you've answered. So if you answered Paul, don't go and review the sections for the other bits, unless you think it's worthwhile. But when you walk in next period, you need to be in a position where you can answer without notes, without any books open, any one of the three questions, teacher's choice. So walking in the room, teacher will be able to say, "We're doing the bioethics question," or "We're doing the Paul question," or "We're doing the whatever." You need to be able to walk in that room, take 30 minutes and do it. And do it to a level that's significantly better than what you've done right now. Before we wrap up then,